Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hello all and welcome to the EarthWorks podcast. We are super excited this week because today we're joined in the office, in the studio, with Mr. Lawrence Mayhew, the biogeochemist from EarthWorks. So I'd like to kick things off. We're with Mr. Joel Simmons, Mr. Mayhew. Joel, what brought Lawrence?
Why is Lawrence here?
What brought Lawrence to Pennsylvania? We're really
we don't get to see him very often,
Yeah.
but it was interesting. We had our sister company, which is Jerry Brunetti's company, Agrodynamics, had what they call a pasture walk on a property of one of a client who's very close to us, part of the family, and you came in for the pasture walk.
Yes.
And we spent a day walking through his farms, and it's an interesting story because he was a true protege of Jerry Brunetti, and I remember this vividly. Many years ago, his name is Rich, and Rich wanted to take his farm and turning it from a conventional farmland into a carbon base. I mean, I hesitate to use the word organic because that's not really what he's doing. He's trying to change it, but the soils were bad. So the one story that he started to tell, and I want you to elaborate on this, is that the first farm was a Christmas tree farm for years. And it's funny because when I was a county extension agent here in this county, we're in Northampton County, Pennsylvania, which is east in Lehigh Valley. This particular farm was one of the first sites that I went to visit as a county extension agent. And it was a Christmas tree farm, and it had been run by a dairy farmer who turned it into a more profitable operation and grew Christmas trees. But in the process of all those years, and Rich talked about this fairly eloquently, they depleted a lot of the potassium on those fields. And he spoke very well yesterday on this pasture walk about what he had to go through. But what he wanted to do was take these conventional ag fields and turn them into sustainable fields where he didn't have a lot of inputs and he could grow grass. He's raising cattle and grass-fed cattle, but he needs to raise good quality grass. And in talking about the whole animal part of it and talking about the protein levels was really interesting. But I mean, kind of give us some of your take on some of this, because I thought the whole day was fascinating.
Yeah, and I just want to interrupt just briefly because I find this so cool that just to touch a little bit on like EarthWorks origin story stuff. These are where you were yesterday in Martins Creek,
Yeah.
and
Where we started.
And Rich and Lynn, they're very close with Lisa.
Yeah.
Lisa, our vice president, general manager. Of course, like you starting as the Penn State County Extension agent
Right.
in Northampton County, meeting Jerry, meeting Rich, being on these fields now 40 years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Doing the pasture
Yeah.
walk with Lawrence. It's way cool.
It was actually interesting, and you mentioned our history. Rich is a lawn care operator. That's really what his core business is. He
was your first customer.
It was my first. We actually walked in his door with one of two. We had two products, 545 and Kick, and we didn't have a name for Kick. And Jerry and I are literally walking through the door. Our first sales call in this new operation called EarthWorks, and we're walking in and we're going to sell them on this product we now call Kick, and we're like, what are we going to call this? I don't know. What do you want to call it? I don't know. And Jerry literally kicked the door open, and we walked in. And he said, "Well, this is product called Kick, and this is 545." That's how businesses start. But
hundreds of thousands of gallons later.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, million gallons later.
Probably.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because Rich is so passionate about what he did to change the soils, and again, now he has the opportunity to change soils with live animals. Now, obviously, in a golf course, we don't have that opportunity, which is why we bring, chicken poop into the equation, because it's essentially mimicking what we heard Rich talk about on that pasture walk yesterday. But some of the things that he talked about and the ways in which he turned the soil on, and again, he will say it was a good 3 or 4 years before he actually turned this, these old conventional farms into productive farms where we could grow quality grass and get the protein levels and all this stuff. And again, a lot of this stuff is not directly pertinent to golf course, but it is. It's agronomy.
We're all into this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, so Lawrence, if you would set the scene for us. Joel mentioned this overused Christmas tree fields,
Yes.
And where they're located. You had mentioned the headwaters. It's close to the Delaware, by the way. So anyway, but give us an idea of the scenario, both geologically and the fields themselves.
Well, I don't get out of the lab much. And
Which is a good thing.
I deal with really, really technical things. And here was this farmer standing in front of us, and he said that the first thing he got quoted on when he took over the project was $30,000 to remove the Christmas trees.
Whoa.
And he said, cut them down. Cows can walk around them. Yeah. I thought that's
They wanted
good.
to pull the stumps.
Now, now we know we're dealing with somebody who really has a practical concept
very
of
good
what it
point.
takes to be successful.
I am not spending $30,000
that's
for
not
no
a
reason to
reason.
grind out
But
stuff.
but if you had someone else standing there from academia, they would have written out a grant for $30,000 to remove the tree stumps.
You're
So,
so
right
right.
away we're getting this picture that this guy is practical.
Yeah, we love that.
And he's hands-on. He's boots on the ground. He's right there every day. He knows what's going on there. Joel mentioned the fact that the soil was depleted in potassium, which from a geological standpoint, that's rather interesting because the parent rock is granite, which is extremely high in potassium.
Yes,
So
right.
your source of potassium is in the rocks. It's right there.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So the
So-
geology there is
The geology was there. He recognized the geology, and he had rocks. He had granite rocks sitting on a table right there. And he said, "You see these little etch lines in the rocks? That's not from hitting it with a plow." He said, "That's from biological activity, etching these rocks, extracting the potassium out of the rocks."
It goes back to what we say that there's all these minerals in the soil, and the plant will work very hard to go and find the minerals.
Yeah,
And
the
that's what
interesting
that was
thing
talking
about plants is that if they need potassium, they will generate the particular root exudate that will dissolve and put into soil solution that potassium that plant needs.
The plant's going to live. It's going to do everything it can to live, and if it's potassium that's its
Right.
limiting factor,
Now-
it finds it. And when he showed us those rocks with the etchings in it, and said these plants in this pasture were looking for this potassium, and there was evidence. And he had
Evidence.
2 or 3 rocks on a
Right.
table. It was fascinating.
It was so wonderful to stand there on that beautiful day with that crowd standing around that table looking at biological activity, etching these rocks, which comes from the microbes, not from the roots. The roots fed the microbes that released the potassium from the rocks. The next thing we did was we walked into a field where there was a combination of clover and grasses. The clover had taken over the grasses. So in a pasture situation like that, that tells me there's something a little out of balance on the calcium, magnesium, potassium ratio. So I noticed that the cows were eating around a patch of clover. They left one patch of clover there, so I reached down and I actually tasted the clover.
He ate the weeds.
No, I ate the clover.
That's right.
'Cause
Okay.
That's the primo stuff. That's what the cows want.
but the cows were leaving this clover.
They left it.
Okay, got it.
And they
I'm
didn't
listening.
eat all the clover in this field, so I tasted it. Sure enough, it was bitter. That means that now he has the reverse situation. He has reversed it from a potassium deficiency to a potassium that's being utilized by the plant, and now the plant is bitter. So he needs to bring in some, and he's fully aware of this. He needs to bring in some calcium to balance that potassium. So totally flip-flop the biochemistry of that soil.
Now this took
Very
this
impressive.
took a number of years. I mean, this took
Oh, yeah, this does
20
not
plus
happen
years.
overnight.
But he saw the evidence of the changes, and you could see.
Yes.
And what was really interesting was there was a couple fields, and some of the fields were heavy in clover and those calcium deficiency plantains and other weeds, and then there was another field next to it that didn't have that at all. And he had mentioned he didn't have a soil test, unfortunately, but I talked to him later, and he had seen some of the data, and he goes, "Yeah, this field definitely has a higher level of calcium." In this particular part of the country, there's a lot of cement factories, and kiln dust is pretty evident. And back in the olden days, if you will, kiln dust used to just fly freely through the air. So these fields had been really, pounded with this calcium.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
carbonate,
very
but it's,
nearby.
So it's actually calcium hydroxide.
Okay.
And so the farms around this area had been very high in calcium, which is unlike this area, which is typically high mag, low calcium.
Oh, interesting.
But that particular field had all that clover and all those, dandelions and plantain kind of weeds. But what was interesting is that, the cows are smart enough to avoid what they don't want.
Tastes bad.
Right.
This is yuck.
Eat it. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So you can actually pick clover that's in a balanced situation, balanced for calcium, magnesium, and potassium, and micronutrients, especially boron. And you can actually pluck it, taste it. It is actually sweet. It has a high sugar level in it at that point.
Yeah.
So they were then with that reason eating plants that were in better balance around that clover.
Yeah.
And so they were eating the grasses. What do you think that they were munching?
Well, the grasses were pretty well overrun by the clover.
In this particular
So
field.
this is a classic case for a person of my training and background in ag to recognize that I know there's a calcium, magnesium, potassium imbalance when you see the grasses being overwhelmed by the clover. They should be pretty much 60-40, I think his answer was to that. You should have about 40% grass under those conditions. He had 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting because I remember, when I first got into this and started working with Jerry, and this was when I was the county agent here, Jerry took me up to a farm very close to where this was. And he had a gentleman with him, and I don't remember who it was, but he was this older gentleman, and we're walking the fields, and he goes, see, this is a calcium deficiency. I'm a young buck county agent. I knew everything about pH that they taught me in school, and I'm like, this is a bunch of crap. And I went back the next day and I ran soil samples, and everything that he said was dead on.
Wow.
And we would walk a farm field. And it was very similar. It reminded me of yesterday. We're walking this farm field, and on the left, there's no clover, there's no plantains, there's none of this. And on the right, it's a completely different weed population. And the soils are radically different because, and you could tell that by looking at the weed population. And that's what this gentleman taught me. And I'm like, I didn't believe any of this stuff until I started really doing the data. Obviously spending all the years I did with Jerry Brunetti, I was completely brainwashed. But I hadn't even really known Jerry when this started. But this was one of the first things that ever really drove this whole idea of balancing soils home to me, is walking a farm field with Jerry Brunetti and this gentleman, and again, I wish I knew his name, and he just walks the field and tells us this is the chemistry of the soil based on the weed population, and you could see vividly, the difference between the one field and the other field because they were treated different. If you watch Kiss the Ground, the movie, Gabe Brown does this in that film, where he's walking on the side of his farm in a semi-arid area. And if you haven't seen Kiss the Ground, I would encourage everybody to watch that video. It's on Netflix. But Gabe Brown is walking the edge of his field after years of working his soils, and his fields are lush and green, and on the other side of the road, it's literally barren. I mean, there was nothing growing on that. Joel Salatin, another sustainable ag guy who was well known in the acres community.
Well known in every community. He's got like 3 episodes on Joe Rogan.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I mean, and he's talking soils. I remember Joel, telling us that he lives in a valley in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and during droughts, his farm would be lush, and farmers around them were accusing him of stealing water. Stealing water from the aquifer or whatever. And he says, no, I'm not stealing water. I got soils. I got humus. I can hold moisture in my soils. You don't have any of that. And that was one of the things that Rich talked about, is that he had decent amount of organic matter, but everything was so imbalanced.
I want to relate this back to the potassium particularly, because this comes up in our world so much, right? Potassium deficiency, and we've worked it. EarthWorks works hard at providing potassium in an efficient way, because potassium is kind of a conundrum. You're adding more K, particularly like muriate of potash or sulfate of potash even, and you're not necessarily seeing the uptake change. So
Moron.
Yeah, the moron principle.
The moron theory.
You're one of your favorites.
Yes. If you don't have anything, put more on.
Pour more on.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this whole geological thing, this geological biological interaction as it can relate to EarthWorks and land care.
Well, one of the really impressive things where we stood yesterday on that beautiful hilltop was that we were standing at the beginning. We were at the very top of 3 watersheds.
Yeah.
So that was the perfect place to build a model demonstration of how do you reduce nitrogen runoff? How do you reduce phosphate runoff? In my opinion, those are micronutrients.
Nitrogen and phosphorus?
Yeah, well, plants use a lot of nitrogen. Well, 80% of
You're going
all
to get us into trouble.
yeah, well, 80% of all the nitrogen on the face of the earth that's in plants is
What?
fixed.
Amino acids.
Fixed.
Aminos,
Fixed.
proteins.
Fixed, yeah.
Photosynthesis
Oh, fixed from...
pulled out of the air. We're breathing 80% nitrogen. Where does it come from?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, it comes from the Haber-Bosch process that requires tons and tons of carbon dioxide in the air and all
Good for
kinds of
making
energies.
bombs.
That's why it was made
Right.
to produce nitrates for explosives. What we've lost is this ability to understand what's going on in this community, and we're standing right there on a ridge top where we're actually now this project is responsible for polluting everything downstream or saving the earth. It was a wonderful thing to observe in action.
So when you say
So you
fixed,
stand there with all those lush fields and all those deep-rooted plants and everything, instead of a pine tree here and a pine tree there, that was being fed potassium chloride. By the way, the more potassium chloride you put on, the less potassium you uptake. So,
And the less microbiology you have. Because
Yeah,
you've just
and there's
added
data, there's
them all.
data behind that.
tons
Yeah.
of research on that. Sulfates are just a little bit better, but calcium sulfate and calcium chloride are not the materials of choice looking at it from a geobiological interaction standpoint.
Or if you are using them, you really need to pound, the biological side of it, bring it back to balance.
It kills
Which
it,
is
though.
what we do. I mean,
just-
Calvantage is
yeah,
a good example of that.
right.
We do use some calcium nitrate, but we have a lot of biological in there to kind of counterbalance.
But actually, to stand there yesterday and stand on those lush fields and realize they're deep rooted and they're capturing
Yeah.
the runoff.
And they're diverse. There's a whole bunch of
it
different
was
species
more than a
and-
good feeling.
Yeah.
It was like, you can do this.
Okay,
It
so-
can be done.
You're saying nitrogen and phosphorus are trace nutrients in that they
Yeah, you
could
know how
be
many
in programs.
you know how many nitrates are actually in a natural balanced soil system? You know how many sulfates are in a natural balanced soil system?
Very little, I imagine.
0.0001 pound per acre. In other words, it's grams, literally grams per acre of sulfates because they don't exist in nature. They're bound with carbon, organic matter.
They're
And
yeah.
nitrogen is always bound with organic matter.
Big carbon
There
compounds.
just isn't any nitrate in
amino
natural
acids,
systems.
amino acids, proteins. Those are
Amino
carbon
acids,
those are-
amino and acid. Amino is the NH group, and yes, and
So
the funny
those
protein.
are-
The funny protein came up yesterday.
Oh,
too.
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Jerry's
yeah.
famous
Funny
conversation.
protein. Yeah.
So just before that, because it does relate to nitrogen, you had mentioned fixing. It's
It's
a
fixed
it's
by
a
microbes.
microbiological
It is.
like nitrogen fixing bacteria.
That's where it comes from. Now you put a bunch on.
Right? They don't work.
It flows. It's called mass flow. You
Yes.
studied that in college.
Yes, we did, and it
And you
kept
had to
coming
get a
up.
good grade because mass flow.
And
it
they
barely
told you
exists.
everything was mass flow.
Oh, they got the physics figured out. Right?
Yeah.
What it really is it's a flush of nitrogen going past the plant root. Momentarily, the plant catches some, and then it keeps right on going out down
See
the
ya.
river, out to the Gulf of Mexico, and
Yeah, you were only 2 miles from the Delaware River where you stood, and
Yeah.
Not even. We
Yeah.
could see it from where we're at some of those fields. One of the things that he talked about was the fact that he keeps a cover crop on there. And this is one of
Always.
the things that we talk
Always.
about in the turf industry is, to be able to maintain.
you already have the cover crop.
You're a cover crop. And the big conversation in sustainable agriculture is no-till and cover cropping. And he was talking about how he would move from one crop to the other by literally just turning the first crop in and planting the second crop. So the organic matter stays, the root mass stays. We're already an industry of cover crop. I mean, we're a cover
Yes.
crop. We're not leaching. I mean, we had this conversation. You mentioned phosphorus. We get harassed for phosphorus abuse, and we're really not doing it because it's staying in the ground. It's not hitting bare soil and rolling down the lane into the streams and into the rivers.
Sure. So there's that function of cover crop, that filtration function of cover crop, but there's also then it is harboring and feeding, the cover crops are harboring supporting and feeding these microbes.
Yeah.
And they're maintaining the moisture level.
That's right,
in
which
the
they
soil.
also need.
Yes.
It's part of the shelter process.
Yeah.
So you then have the space, the environment in which these nitrogen-fixing bacteria live and do their work.
You'll like this one. There was
All
a
the
couple
time.
gentlemen from I think the Soil Conservation Service.
Yes.
But he brought up the quote that we talk about a lot. For every 1% organic matter, you're going to save 28,000 gallons.
I thought it was 43,000.
No, it was 28,000.
Oh, darn.
I actually thought it was 25,000.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought...
He said 20, and
we're going with that.
I actually said, well, 28. I'll take that.
Yeah, that's okay.
But,
Not bad.
but a lot of water. Let's forget
That's
the
the
number.
whole
But a lot of water, and and again, and that's what we're trying to do. And when we get to a lot of these properties that you and I work on, there's virtually no organic matter, and in sand, there's no organic.
Or you think that 2% is a lot.
Yeah.
Organic matter.
Okay.
Yesterday, he showed us where he pulled a weed out of sand. Then he showed us the sand where the roots were contacting the sand. Guess what color it was? It wasn't sand
Yeah, it
color
was brown.
anymore. Now it's dark.
Yeah.
Carbon.
That
Of
really
course.
struck him.
And that struck him.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
He
our
was,
golf guys see that.
yeah.
Yeah,
all
you
the
had
time.
to remember this guy went through an evolution of being absolutely conventional poor moron to what he is today.
And he's a lawn care operator. So, and he's a conventional lawn care operator, or he has been. And so, I mean, his whole mindset was, this is all hocus pocus.
Yes.
Wow.
And to hear him speak yesterday, I mean, he's completely, he has seen it firsthand. But tell the story again. I mean, that weed in the sand pile was as striking a conversation as we heard all day yesterday.
Yeah, in order to build carbon in soils, you're never going to do it by adding carbon to the soil.
Yeah.
You're going to have to be adding thousands of tons of carbon per acre just to bring it up a teeny little bit. So you're never going to achieve it by adding carbon to the soil.
And so when
I like that.
But the plants are extremely efficient at converting those sugars and carbohydrates and fats and lipids and everything else into a root exudate, which goes into the soil as a carbonation compound, and they do it all day long.
Yeah.
And it's
So
a
don't think of
wonderful
us as
cycle.
EarthWorks as saying, oh, we're organic fertilizer, use it at 10 pounds per thousand, and you're going to be adding all this
you're going to
carbon.
have 4
Yeah, no, that's
organic.
not, that's not what we do.
No, what we're
exactly.
doing is we're feeding the microbes that
Yeah,
start the digestion
we're a spark
process.
plug.
We're a spark plug.
Yeah.
And that's really
Yes.
what any kind of organic fertilizer in the golf course industry is. It's just getting the microbes working. So, and a lot of humus is dead microbes. So, but they're also doing the digestion.
But if he had fed that plant, that it happened to be a weed,
yeah.
I don't know why he picked a weed, but it still was very dramatic. But if he had fed that plant high NP and K, you would not see that organic matter being exudated into the sand.
Yeah, that's kind
Wouldn't
of
happen.
That you can relate that and build any kind of metaphor. It's like, if you're just keeping something alive, it's not going to do the work to like keep itself alive.
Exactly.
You're keeping it alive.
Yeah.
You're not-
And Rich talked about this. So what that plant, because it's sand, there's nothing there. So it was working triple time, pumping down, pulling everything out of the sun, pumping it down out of its root system, looking for anything that can dissolve and bring in.
It was colonizing.
It was-
Think
yeah,
about
it
like
was colonizing.
colonizing Mars.
Yeah.
Like you get
Exactly.
there, you got to do a lot of work.
Fabulous fungi,
Yeah,
It's the
there's nothing
Netflix
else
series.
there.
Yeah, I mean, it was trying to get the starting point. The other interesting thing was when we were sitting there and the guy from the USDA was running his tubes.
Yes.
He had taken a cylinder of water, and there was a little cup on the top, 2 different cylinders, and he put a weed from a conventional farm in there, or a plant, a clump of soil that had some
was
plant
crop,
material.
actually.
It was a crop.
Yeah.
And so he put it in this cylinder of water, and then he had one that was from Rich's farm, which was the, I'll use for better term, the organic soil. And what he was trying to show was that, and it worked. I mean, I was pretty taken by it.
Dramatic.
The first, the conventional one, that soil, it just dissipated into that water. The one from the organic side, there was no residue in that. It held together. The soil texture was held together, so that colander was not muddied, it was not cloudy. But the one from the conventional, where there was no life, there was no, it wasn't being held together. And he ended up talking about the dust bowls and the whole.
But he did mention glomalin.
Oh, we did?
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting because I did want to shift to mycorrhizae
Okay.
at some point.
And glomalin.
Yeah, and they all relate.
Oh, how do you pronounce it?
But I do want to just re-emphasize that point that you were standing there at, like you said, the headwaters of 3 different tributaries that quickly
Watersheds,
ran
yeah.
the watersheds that quickly ran to the Delaware. That and you did this beautiful, very really elegant and simple field test in those columns
In the field.
Yeah, in the field.
Interesting.
And you could see how the field that had life, that had that organic matter, it sequestered, it complexed, it buffered, it did whatever the.
It was
words are.
interesting that and again, I apologize, I don't remember this gentleman's name or really what organization he was with, but he was with a conventional, government agency, and he was very excited about this. I mean, that when I was Extension, we didn't see that until you saw Ray Archuleta, who was the star of Kiss the Ground. He was the first guy that would run around with that kind of a presentation. I think you've seen him at various conferences doing that, but it's fascinating to see, and it was glomalin. I mean, that's really what he was talking about, is that organic or that living soil was being held together physically. All that material was being held together by all that biology, whereas the other soil's biology was extremely depleted.
For our audience, the glomalin or glomalin comes from fungi.
That's right.
It's called glomalin.
I don't know.
and also
I keep forgetting to remember that.
it's come up in our talks before, and I referred to it or I've seen it on slides as mineral associated organic matter, in that the glomalin really combines well with the existing mineral.
It's a free wetting agent is what it is.
Sure.
Glomalin was discovered by Sarah Wright at the USDA field office in Beltsville, Maryland in the mid-90s, in our lifetime, in the lifetime of this company. And we didn't know anything about that. And it's associated with mycorrhizae, which, we are now huge fans of via the mycorrhizae products that we're selling. But it's very effective at building that soil structure. And again, if you go and watch Fabulous Fungi, the Netflix movie, you're going to learn a lot about mycorrhizae and how this internet works. But the glomalin held that soil together in that tube, whereas the other soil just
Okay, so like,
and imagine when it rains, all that soil just moving and moving, and enriches soil, and in fact, we had just had massive flooding in the town that we were walking yesterday.
Yes.
And they were talking about canceling, and Rich goes, no, my pastures are perfect.
that is such a huge point, and because we've all had pretty bad flooding in the last month on the East Coast. A lot of communities have been really beat up by it, and they took in that area. I heard the figures were like 5 inches of rain in less than an hour.
Yeah,
in less than an
national
hour.
news. I mean, Jerry's old street is just all the bridges were washed.
So
That's
there
how
you
bad it
are
is.
on that field
On
the
that
next
field, right
day.
there.
The next day.
Yeah.
And driving past conventional fields that were flooded.
Still holding water.
Unbelievable.
Still holding water.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, no infiltration in the conventional
I mean, it was
fields.
actually kind of funny because when we got there, they're all saying, "Well, do you have rubber boots?" It's we just had big flooding.
Yeah.
And he goes,
I went there with
I don't have any rubber boots. I didn't have
shoes.
rubber boots. We walked those fields for 4 hours.
I still have the same shoes on.
Well, you had a
Not even mud.
dense
No,
stand
no
of pasture, a dense pasture stand that was quickly taking up moisture. You had all of this, what I would say is topsoil, but topsoil includes a bunch of things. You easily think of humus when you think of topsoil, but you also need to associate glomalin because that's a key factor in it. So let's kind of deep dive that glomalin. We mentioned it comes from mycorrhizae, it comes from fungus. It associates and kind of is a glue within the topsoil. So a little bit more about how it came about and what's its function and how long it lasts. And
Yeah, it's a hydrophobic polysaccharide,
Thank you.
which means it doesn't dissolve in water.
yes,
Which is why that cylinder stayed clear.
Right.
when you hear like that this carbon can be sequestered and locked in the soil for 1,000 years, that's the stuff.
Well,
we're talking
what's
about.
amazing is you say build organic matter and the soil will allow heavy water flooding to infiltrate it.
Mm-hmm.
But wait a minute, didn't we also say that it holds water?
Yeah.
So
How does that work?
yeah, how does that work? It's like studying
But
humic
it also
substances.
creates porosity, so water can
Right.
move around. You know,
Right.
this is, and you and I have had this conversation many times in the golf course industry. You know, guys will look at a layer of what they call organic matter bad, and it's always in their head that this is bad, when in fact it may not be bad. It could be good organic.
There was a road paralleling the field.
Mm-hmm.
He gave everybody the choice. You can walk on the road or you can walk in the field. And he said, I like to walk on the field because I want to feel the sponginess. Not the compaction,
Yeah.
the sponginess. And not one person walked down that
Yeah.
road.
and
They're all out there feeling that.
And like I said, there were a lot of us just wearing shoes, and I
Shoes,
wore
regular
shoes,
shoes.
and a lot of people had boots on, but nobody needed. I mean, I can remember walking those fields when we first started working with Jerry.
There you go.
And they were muddy.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of grass material or plant material in there.
The mud stick to your
And
shoes.
I mean, that was one of the first times I remember that. And we've talked about this in our academies all the time. When you have high magnesium soils, which we have in this area, that magnesium gets sticky. It sticks, you got an extra shoe on the bottom of your sole. This field had none of that.
Nope.
We got none of that. I don't even remember if I cleaned my shoes. I don't think there was even any mud on them.
And glomalin, because we were saying this is a hydrophobic material that is managing water. So hydrophobic, I thought that's afraid of water, but this is managing water. What's going on?
Yeah.
I'd say,
We don't
Providing structure.
that's right.
It's structure.
I like the metaphor of the irrigation system is a hydrophobic system
Yes,
that
it
delivers water.
Yeah.
Because those pipes, the water doesn't go through the pipe. The water is contained by
See,
the
what
pipe.
I don't understand about your industry is
Right.
why is there this fear of hydrophobicity? And it's amazing to me because the most important interactions that occur in soils are all hydrophobic. And it's from a
Explain that.
well,
that's
from
a term that a lot of people
from a
are confused by.
thermodynamic standpoint, it'd be a waste of time for nature to work with entirely solubilized materials.
Right.
Because those materials need to be balanced, they need to be stabilized. They can't.
They're free radicals if they're solubilized. Like they're just out there. How do I gather them?
I think what we're seeing are crusts that are hydrophobic. And then you jump to a major conclusion from there. Oh, hydrophobic, bad. Well, it's not quite that way. The most important interactions on the face of the earth occur under hydrophobic condition, especially the attachment of microorganisms to a mineral particle, to a soil colloid. They have to literally move the water out of the way so they can make their hydrophobic condition that allows them to attach to a colloid.
Yeah,
They can't do that, like if there's way too many salts in that solution, maintaining soil
Dehydrated.
yeah, then they have a problem. Then they cannot adhere to the soil colloids.
And that's what Rich was talking about. I mean, the fields had been treated with a lot of salt fertilizer.
A lot of salt.
And all of those functions were happening prior to him getting on that
Yes,
property.
right.
And and he made the point very clearly that it took years to start to make the change. And and he was talking to a lot of farmers that had come to visit and kept saying, look, don't be afraid, take the leap of faith and understand that if you get once you get the soil jump started, and we talk to new clients all the time at EarthWorks, it takes a lot of upfront investment. I just had a conversation that
With Tim.
right before we left, came here to record. The soils were dead. You could see it on the paste extract. And so we're asking them to put that investment up front, which means a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of product. But once you get that flywheel flying, and Rich was a great example of
Yes.
that. Once you get that flywheel flying, everything starts to come out of the program. And now, you're incredible. He hasn't spent money on, this is really interesting. Agrodynamics, our sister company, sells minerals for cows. He doesn't even buy the minerals because his protein levels and his mineral levels coming out of that soil are now high enough.
Fine.
He's not even supplementing it. And this is his sister who's selling him the product. And she's like,
She interrupted at one point and said, I'll give it to him, but he won't even take it. I'll give it away.
Right.
I like that.
But the reason is that he's getting, he's created the soil that allowed the plants to bring up the minerals that the cows need. And one of the striking things that I remember vividly from early days with Jerry was that full cycle. When he would go into a farm and there was a cow down, he would go and look at the cow and try to get the cow on its feet. And then the very next thing he would do is go to the farmer's office and say, I want to see your soil test. And the farmer would go, soil test? I'm talking about Bessie. What are you talking about?
Water
Yeah,
test.
and exactly. And then finally it would kick in. He goes, Bessie's not getting what she needs because it's not getting into the grass that she's eating, and it's not coming out of the soil.
Yeah.
That's what Rich was really focused on this whole process over all these years. It was getting the soils the minerals that they need so that the plants had the minerals that they need so they could stay strong. Now, in our world in golf, we stop at that. We're not feeding cows, obviously, on our greens, but it's still the same point. The plant is healthier. And if the plant is healthier, it's going to survive the stress that our clients put it under. And it's the same analogy. It doesn't matter if we happen to have a cow on it or don't have a cow. The plant needs to be healthy. And that comes from, one of the things that Jerry was really adamant about all those years was remineralization.
Yeah, you see these conventional farmers that rely entirely upon herbicides and pesticides to control their problems, whereas right next door to them is an organic farmer that doesn't do any of that.
Yeah.
And they're doing it successfully. They're getting the pricing. They've got the production. Used to have low production. That's all gone by and by because of mineral balancing.
Yeah.
So if you ate an awful lot of salt this morning and an awful lot of sugar, probably the next day you're not going to be feeling very
Your
well.
fingers are going to be swollen.
So you have a drug deficiency at that point.
That's right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So the point is, if we can feed ourselves a balanced program of nutrition and remain healthy because our body has the ability to express all these resistances to all these invasive things, well, so can plants.
Yeah. And the interesting thing was he was talking about this. He knew what was balanced and what was not balanced. Yeah. And he wasn't taking fertilizer and building minerals because he had animals to do that for him. So he worked the soil with the animals. So they would hoof it, they would put manure down, and then he would rotate them around and then let that field recover. So, and that was the process that took so long. We don't have that luxury.
And he would probably at some point seeded the right plants.
He didn't seed out much. He seeded one field, which was interesting.
Oh, okay.
So much. He's a low budget farmer.
Sure.
He's a gentleman farmer, really.
Yeah, that's right.
He's got a small herd, but he's changing the soils. And he only seeded one field. The other fields he's just letting it happen naturally. So he knew that based on he rotational grazes, but based on the biomass and the organic matter and the soil, that's where it would dictate where he moves the cows. And then the fields that are the weakest, he would work them a little longer and then let them rest a lot longer because it would allow the plant material to recover. And now it's getting, it's reworking that mineral complex. But again, this is what Jerry was very adamant about. And in our world, we are adamant about remineralizing because a lot of our soils are light CECs, sand. So, and there's no mineral in there. So everything that we do through the chicken, now we're essentially bringing the cow to the golf course through a bag of chicken manure. And that manure is rich in minerals because it's all gone through and out the back end of the chicken. We've said this a million times. They put a lot of money into feeding chickens and they're so inefficient. Most of it comes out the back end and we get to give it to you guys. So, but it's all mineral density and there you have it. You're remineralizing that soil.
And not just that, but I mean that could work for acreage where you have natural soil. I mean, there's a lot of situations where we're growing in constructed sand root zones.
Right.
Then you're bringing even more mineral, and you're bringing some more amendments, some different approaches.
Well, if you look at Renovate Plus,
that's what I'm thinking.
That's almost all mineral package.
Sure.
I mean, it's a lot of rock minerals, all designed. We looked at 3 different functions there: remineralization, organic matter, and then holding capacity with the zeolite. But a lot of rock minerals. And again, that was one of the things that Jerry was adamant about, is that these soils, and this is the perfect example. Rich was dealing with mineral deprived soils, and he changed it by just doing what he does. And again, it wasn't a fast process. I mean, we can't do that on a golf course, so we kind of push the envelope a little bit. But that's what we have to do to try to mimic this kind of a soil profile.
The other thing we do in these constructed root zones, and B, also to make up for some of the other management practices, is we bring mycorrhizae back to mycorrhizae, because I want to get back to that.
You love mycorrhizae.
I do love mycorrhizae. I was also talking to a client about it this morning as well.
So mycorrhizae.
It's and he had some questions. We talked about a couple different things, but it also relates to solutes, to soluble phosphorus, particularly to the way that what we were talking about, the nitrates and the nitrogen fixing bacteria. in the presence of a lot of soluble phosphorus, if you're adding soluble phosphorus, you're depleting mycorrhizia.
Yeah, it shuts that system down.
It shuts the system down. So let's just again talk quickly about what mycorrhizae are doing. We mentioned that they're building glomalin, and in that building topsoil, lasting topsoil that manages water very well. But they're also finding mineral and delivering it to the plant, particularly.
Mycorrhizae are such a great extension of the root system that if you're studying mycorrhizae as a scientist, you are hard pressed to try to separate the roots from the mycorrhizae. And when you pull up and rinse this ball of root mass in water and try to examine it, it's almost indistinguishable where the roots start and end, where the mycorrhizae start and end. They are so cold.
It means root extension, right?
Yeah, it increases the mass area, the surface area for this plant, and it reaches out into areas. Oh, one of my favorite things in college was depleting phosphorus in these little zones.
Okay.
Oh, gee, really? At that rate, they're all dead. So what happens in reality is that the plant senses a deficiency in phosphorus, for example, and then it'll actually feed those mycorrhizae or stimulate them in some way or another, whatever it takes, whatever they're eating, whatever they're being fed.
Through
and the mycorrhizae will extend out, and the roots will follow. This is working really good, so they and next thing you know, you have a massive root ball. So one of the first things I learned in sustainable agriculture was, let's go into the field, dig up the roots, see how big the root balls are.
Okay.
Like on a conventional corn stalk, the root ball is about that big.
Yes.
And the corn lodges, falls over.
You put it in water and it just leaches right out.
But you go into a biologically managed field, or in organic agriculture is a form of biological agriculture. You get your spade out and there's this massive root ball on the end of these corn plants.
Which is what we're growing, these monocots, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, same as corn.
And it's so dramatic to demonstrate that to a farmer. And next thing you know, the farmers are out there digging these things up to see what's going on. And then they start looking for earthworms and everything else that says that there's great biology going on in this root system.
Now, just a little bit, because there's phosphorus in the compost that we
plenty.
That we have with
More
than the
enough.
Myco 333.
That's gone through the bird.
It's gone through the bird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
So there's also the mycorrhizae spores that we're adding to it, but we're
mycorrhizae.
not adding triple superphosphate.
No.
We're not adding, and we're not recommending that in the program, because
In fact, it's detrimental.
that's what we're saying. Yeah, it will
Right.
stop down that process. And now, but what is the difference between the triple superphosphate and the phosphorus that's associated with the compost? How come we're having such success?
Well, that feed material that had phosphorus in it, I didn't say phosphate, that had phosphorus in it in some form or another, some chemical form, went
Some
through.
of it is rock phosphate.
Oh, that's
That's the thing,
excellent.
yeah,
Rock
right,
phosphate.
yeah.
That's a combination of calcium, phosphorus, and oxygen, and carbon, and fluoride, and there's one other in there.
No, it doesn't.
Hydroxide.
love it.
So, that's a very complex form of phosphorus.
Okay, so anyway,
And it's also associated with other things like
Yeah.
lanthanide minerals. And
I thought
there's,
that
there's
rare
trace and
minerals,
ultra
Rare
trace.
earth minerals.
Yeah, those rocks have not been processed. They are everything's in them. Everything that nature provided in them. Any mineral is always, like you look for a boron mineral, for example, you'll find it associated with a calcium mineral. This is nature. Or you find a calcium mineral, you'll find boron associated with it, or you'll find strontium associated with it. You look on the periodic table, it all makes sense. It's all right there all together. So what was the question?
well, I think I'm getting the answer.
Doesn't matter the answer. But
I think I'm getting the answer, but the question was, how is the phosphorus that's complex?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's complex in the compost.
There's the question.
Yeah,
it passes through a digestive system where there's enzymes acting on it. Now it's not going to come out in the same form it went in. It's going to be
That's right.
processed.
That's right.
And it's going to be biologically linked to carbon in
Yes.
some form or another, and it's stabilized at that point.
So it is,
And then you
not-
compost it, stabilize it even more. Now you don't have a free phosphate floating around, which we've all been told that's what plants take up. Yeah.
It's also what shuts down mycorrhizae.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And
that's
it's
not the way the system works.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because we know that plants take up through mycorrhizae. You know, they don't
It's
take
like
up
saying
through
I
mass
used fire
flow.
this morning to make my coffee, right?
Yes.
You know,
Nice,
oh,
right?
good, fire. Good.
Fire,
Let's
good.
reach in there and
Hold
take
on.
some with us.
It doesn't work.
You know, and it was interesting because Rich even made mention of this when we were walking the fields, is that, you know, he doesn't want to use those products because he knows it's going to, you know, the microbiology is going to say, well, I don't need to do this because it's, you know, phosphorus is here. So they just shut down. And it's, you know, using mycorrhizae, even in the golf course, there's no reason to use a lot of synthetic phosphorus.
How do we kind of wrap this all up into something that's applicable to our turf industry?
Well,
What we saw yesterday.
Well, I mean, I think we've tried to do that here, but I think that the point is that if you let the soil just do its thing and remineralize it, and you know, you can change it. Now, again, he's got a different approach because he had the animals. We don't have that luxury,
Right.
but that's kind of what EarthWorks is doing. Is we're bringing the animal, if you will, in that scenario onto the into the equation and allowing that mineral to come in there.
What I saw yesterday was a system that's not being pushed.
Right.
Yeah.
Less is
Yeah.
more, but
And
as long
he-
as it's the
and
right
he
less.
pays attention to mineral balancing. He looks at his soil testing. You know, it's a system of balance.
And
You know,
like-
how can organic matter be so infiltrating at the same time holding water? Well, that's that balancing act
Yeah.
that nature has
and at the
figured
same
out.
time as being so efficient in cost and labor.
And thus
Yeah, like really, and we talk about that at EarthWorks all the time.
Right.
We're reducing. We're efficient.
Yeah, I mean, look at the sports turf guys. Look at the lawn care operators that are doing, you know, good, carbon-based fertility in their program. 1 or 2 applications of carbon in their programs, they're taking 2 or 3 trucks off the road because they don't have to be running back and forth all the time. You know, one of my favorite stories that you and I have a conversation about all the time is you get a guy that's worked with an EarthWorks client and they built this nice level of organic matter and it's humus. And then the next guy comes and goes, oh my gosh, I got all this organic, I got to get this out of here because everybody in the industry, oh, organic bad, organic bad. In this case, it was draining incredibly well. The roots were down to here, but they spent all this time with a grain pulling it all out. And this was 5 years of investment in building that, and it was working perfectly.
That's. I mean, I put it to like they're just putting in the feeding tube.
Yeah.
You know, like so they're just taking it all out so they can insert a feeding tube and then be done with it. But I'd rather make a ham sandwich. So.
I think that. So we got to run, but did we answer that question that you just asked? I mean, what is, you know,
Yes.
we're trying to bring this,
Right.
you know, this story of yesterday and walking this pasture to what our clients are talking about and having to live through. But, you know, and I think, you know, the analogies are perfect.
Yeah, it was just a full-scale demonstration of what we've been saying for a long time, that it works.
Yeah.
And it can be done efficiently. It could be done affordably. I mean, he had a really tight budget.
He had no
Very
budget.
good.
Yeah, he
Well,
almost
pretty
had
much
nothing.
no budget.
He got a lot of
Yeah.
grants, and he's
Yeah.
a working man, and and this was a family farm.
Yeah, he took on a
Gentleman
project.
farmer,
He took on a
yeah.
project that normally cost about 3 times that if they approached it conventionally.
Sure,
he did
sure.
it for a fraction of the cost, and
Well, I love the way you set the scene there and said he got the quote for stump grinding for
Yeah.
$30,000. No thanks.
No.
All good.
Oh.
Hey guys, thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing this with me
Okay.
because now I felt like I got to experience this too.
Good.
And this is again, this was super special because this is EarthWorks growing ground.
It's full circle.
It's full circle,
You know,
man.
I-
This is where we came from.
I
right
remember
here.
the first day Jerry and I walked on his first fields with him, and they were horrible.
Yeah.
There was virtually all that plant material. There was hardly any plant material. There was a lot of thistles. There was a lot of just horrible scrub, a lot of roses,
he said there's a lot of burdock.
a lot of burdock, so all
Yeah.
calcium deficiencies, and he's been able to make the change. So
Burdock means poor soil nutrition.
yes, horrible stuff.
Yeah.
That we're going to be back with you. Are we? Maybe even next week, but we're gonna record another one. But thank you so much for your time on this, and it was a great day yesterday. Thank you everybody for listening. If you're not a subscriber to the EarthWorks podcast, please subscribe. We'll let you know when we bring Mr. Mayhew back to the table, and it'll give you an opportunity to know where we are and what's coming up next. But thank you very much. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot.